Warm welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all so much for the work that you all do. I am standing here today because of the work of the people in this room. And I'll name one in particular. Louise Kindley was my therapist when I was 22 years old. And I credit for really preventing my suicide. And I can't say enough good work about the St. Luke's Roosevelt Crime Victims Assessment Center and how maybe they broke the rules by allowing me to have free therapy for 6 months, sometimes twice a week, in order to keep me on track and help me be whole and be who I am today. And one of the particular things about Louise that was so beneficial to me was that she allowed me to be my whole person. All the aspects of who I am. And what that looks like, really, was her not judging and not pathologizing anything that I brought to her, including feelings of sadness that I had that my father had passed away. My father was my abuser. So when I think about why it is that I can identify as a transcender today, when people ask me to identify as a victim, survivor, I say mostly I identify as a transcender, which causes complications sometimes because then people think I said I was transgender. So I do appreciate that asking us our preferred gender pronouns, and so that I can just stand in my place as a transcender. And what I think is really important about that is that she let me identify that from the beginning, right? And that she didn't see any feelings of warmth or sadness towards my father, or sadness I felt about my father's passing as something that was to be pathologized or to become a part of what she needed to work on to help me get back into places of anger and feelings that I was trying to move beyond. So to her and to all those who hear and really listen to and really hear survivors, I just want to say thank you. And thank you in particular for listening to me today. So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and we were the only immigrant family in a very large radius in our county. And there, only person of color in my school, and I was also being sexually abused in my home by my father. And I knew even then, as a young child, to be afraid of systems. And what I knew even then is that the very systems that in theory were designed to protect me, our immigration laws and our criminal legal laws and child protective services, didn't attend to what my desires were. I didn't want my father incarcerated. I didn't want my mother and my sister to potentially be deported. I didn't want to be taken away from my family and put in the home of a white family where there was basically nothing but Christianity when that wasn't my religion growing up. And so I didn't want to be saved on a number of levels. I wanted to heal, and I wanted my family to heal. And so it was the nexus of those very systems, which I think Jackie spoke about so beautifully, right? It was sort of what I call the racism of the Crimmigration CPS cluster of central Pennsylvania, that really kept me silent and forced me to endure the abuse that I was enduring in my home. And so, but those things were all individually well-intentioned, but we weren't thinking about what Gandhiji calls the last girl, right? Who is this going to impact? And what are all of these, what is the nexus of all of these things going to impact? When I say these things to this crowd, I feel that it makes, in some ways, people get a little deflated. It's like, well, what can I do about all of that? And so I want to return to the notion that the answer is actually something that we all do every day, which is to listen to survivors and what we need in order to heal, because the answer is there. So when I was 16 years old, my father passed away. And I was a real overachiever, and I was a Girl Scout all the way as Girl Scout. And one of the things that I had to do was take a CPR class, so they could send us out into the woods with like an egg and a tent or something. So I had just taken the CPR class, and my mother called me, and my father had been sick for 6 or 7 months. I heard my mother screaming my name in the middle of the night, and I run into their bedroom, and my father was convulsing and was dying. And I jumped onto that bed and I did CPR on my dying father. And in the years that followed, there were several therapists who really wanted to break that piece down. That was the thing I was struggling with the most. So this was my last real interaction with him. And they wanted to break this down in a way that really was pathologizing. People called it Stockholm Syndrome, that I wanted to save my captor. That it shows the degree to which I had internalized his story, that I would actually do this in his last moments, when I had truly prayed for his death as well. I was quite a conflicted young person. And then when I was 24 years old, I was living in India. I was working with trafficked women and children, and I had a full-blown breakdown, and I left to go backpacking, and I landed in Dharamshala, which is the home of the Tibetan people in exile, where the Dalai Lama lives, and through this amazing random course of events, I got a private audience with His Holiness. At which point I was very angry and feminist and asked him lots of questions like, how come you've never come back as a woman? And he was very answers, which I could tell you about later. But, and he really talks all the time about maybe my next incarnation, if I return, will be as a woman. And he's trying to encourage people to open their minds to that, which I think is great. One of the things that he did the first time, other than Louise, right, that I really felt this full compassion as he listened to the totality of my story. But he also really had that moment of the CPR as my finest moment. And then he really helped me dissociate it from what my father did, but really helped me tap into that this is who I am. This is who I am. I am someone who would do this. And something permanently changed at that moment. Years later, Claudia Davis, with whom I got to work, she's the founder and executive director of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, with whom I worked for several years. And we were in a circle once where I was sharing stories of transcending child sexual abuse in schools, in Oakland schools, helping teachers understand and identify the signs of CSA amongst their very strong girls, because this is what I hear a lot from people say, you were so strong and happy. Yes, I was, and I was being sexually abused. And so it was at this point that I reached in the conversation where I was sharing the story about doing CPR, and Fania says the word Ubuntu. Ubuntu. She just kept saying it. And I remembered it from Archbishop Desmond Tutu's book, No Future Without Forgiveness. Ubuntu is a Bantu word which means I am because we are. Or a person is a person through other people. And when I was able for the first time to hold that was, she said, children haven't yet lost touch with the notion of Ubuntu. And it was like a wake up. Yes, I am because we are. I literally existed because my father existed, because his father existed, because his parents, their parents existed. And the abuse also existed because of transgenerational trauma. My father, too, was sexually abused. And who knows who abused the person before him, right? So to me, this was another big aha, Ubuntu. I am because we are. And this is because we do this, right? And what else can we do? So today, I love my father. Today, I've completely forgiven my father. Through the guidance of this holiness, who was here yesterday, I heard, in the meeting with the Senate, so exciting. Through his guidance, I was able to let go of my anger towards my father and the rage and the fury that was killing me, literally migraine, stomach problems, and after forgiveness, all of it vanished. This is not to say that forgiveness is always the answer, or it is a complicated question and an issue that I really think, again, there just simply needs to be space out for all possibilities. So through this, I feel that it left my mind open to really digging in a way that I never had before to how are we going to end child sexual abuse? How are we going to end intimate partner violence without rage and anger flooding sort of the field of the possibility of solutions, a solutions-oriented approach? So So I came upon restorative justice, which felt right to me, and I'll talk about it more in tomorrow's session. But the real thumbnail sketch of it is instead of asking who's harmed, instead of asking rather what law was broken, who broke it, and how do we punish them, restorative justice asks a different set of questions. Who's harmed? What do they need? And whose obligation is it to meet those needs? So without that third question, the obligation, it wouldn't be a theory of justice. It would just be what we all do anytime we're engaged with someone who suffered great harm. Like, how are you harmed and what do you need? When we add, and whose obligation is it? And then how do we operationalize the meeting of those obligations? That is what, as a lawyer, got me excited. And also felt like moving towards solutions that were victim-centered, survivor-centered, right? This felt like the real feminist answer. Rather than outsourcing answers to another entity with power over, particularly as an immigrant, particularly as a person of color, I became excited about ways that families and communities could wrap around the people who really know, the survivors, the transcenders. So it also asks us to move beyond fear. I was recently in India and training a group of organizations that work to end child sexual abuse there, and a group of people who are interested in ending the juvenile death penalty, which was what was India's response to the Delhi rape case, right? You know about that. This is so people came together to the two sides to think about could restorative justice offer another way, and they are as hampered because the laws are new about what is and isn't allowed. And so the creativity and the thinking that came from that space was thrilling. I think it's also a way that we need to move beyond fear. I recently heard from a woman who, this story is still really hard for me to share. She wanted to know if restorative justice was an option for her and her child. And what about her child could get therapy? Her husband had sexually assaulted her child and they separated. But she's now dying of cancer and he carries her health insurance. If she takes her daughter to the therapist or she comes to us for help with the restorative justice resolution, will there have to be mandated reporting? And I said, well, basically all of us are mandated reporters, and she quickly got off. I said, wait, hold on, and I told her, at least call me back, next week, let's do some research about how I can help you. She's so afraid that her ex would get locked up and that she would lose her health insurance as she's dying, right? So we're not solving the problem this way, right? I never heard from her again. She weighs heavy on my heart. So we need to move beyond fear. And if it worked the way we were doing things today, there's a report that was published by the Miss Foundation. I can't remember the name of it right now. I should have written it down. But I remember seeing a chart in it that showed that in 100 cases of child sexual abuse, less than 3% actually end up getting prosecuted, right? Only 10 to 15 or 10 to 18%, depending on the jurisdiction, even made it onto the radar of the system. And in the end, less than 3% end up in a conviction. We know that that's a plea deal down, right? So, from what actually occurred. And did it reduce recidivism? Did it stop sexual offending? No, it did not, right? So, what could work? Is restorative justice the answer? I think it is an answer. I think it is one of the options that needs to be available, particularly when survivors want it. I went to law school to become a prosecutor, to work on sex offenses and on police partner violence. And it was when I started to hear the stats that I said, this isn't going to do what I want to do. So I also realized I didn't want to just relocate the harm, the sexual harm, inside prisons, right? And so I'm really glad we're hearing from Just Detention. I'm glad that we're really waking up to the impact of what simply relocating sexual harm inside locked facilities that are run by our taxes is about. So I want us to think, as I close, about what it means for us to really ask the transcenders for the answers. When I think about the laws that we made after the people who we've lost, the children that we've lost, Naomi's law, Marcy's law, right? I started to think about what would it be like to have a Sujapa's law. My law would be that restorative justice would be available for those who could use it and need it. My law would be that we would be funding the St. Louis Roosevelt's Great Crisis Center forever, right? But these are the things that actually allowed me to heal and thrive, right? So the law of the living is something that I started thinking about. What if we did workshops across the nation? We ask people who survive, why don't we build legislation on what works to heal it, right? Because really, you know, for me, as I age and I see more and more of what is working, I become more optimistic. And there's a quote by Aruda Roy that really speaks to me. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And her voice is here, it's right here in this room, in the Transcenders. So let's be quiet. And let's quiet our fears, and let's really listen. Thank you.
Thank you.